Okay, so yes, I'm outside of my ecological comfort zone speaking about Japan, and that will be self-evident as we go through the slides. I will say in advance, excuse my pronunciation of some of the Japanese words because I'm sure I'm going to get them wrong. Okay, and the text is there to keep me on track as much as give you a little bit of a message, all right? So the earliest people in Japan, the earliest people like us, Homo sapiens sapiens, go back to 35,000 years ago when the islands that made up the Japanese archipelago, Kyushu, Shikoku, Honshu, Hokkaido, were linked to the mainland. This is a time during the last glaciation, so hence the glacier at the bottom there. Subsequently, there were several colonizations from different parts of the Asian mainland, especially the Korean peninsula. However, after 13,000 BC, it's made more difficult because the ice sheets melted, the sea rose, and people had to come by sea, which they did. So I'm waiting for the next slide. Anyway, there's been some recent DNA studies which I managed to source to indicate that the ancestors of the modern Japanese came from both the northern part of the Asian mainland and the southern part of it. But when we compare the ancient DNA, which we have from skeletal material from the earliest people, like the person there, we find that the actual fact that the earliest people, the two ethnic groups on the islands, and which seem to be there a lot earlier than the present Japanese. Anyway, the first evidence we have, consistent evidence, is 10,000, 11,000 years ago, when climatically Japan was quite similar to today. Very high rainfall in Japan, 120 inches a year, which means that vegetation grows rapidly, including the forests, which cover something like 70% of the land area even today. But then we have to realize that most of the forests are in the mountainous areas. 80% of the land area of Japan is mountains, or mountains it always has been. So I'm in front of myself. The waters around Japan, the seas and the rivers are very rich in fish life, mackerel, herring, migratory fish like trout and salmon. We'd be familiar with that in our island. And this abundance of foods, plant foods, foods from the sea and food from the rivers was a really veritable bonanza in terms of food for these early people. The earliest occupation is known as the Jomon. It goes back to 11,000 BC, as I said. It comes back to 3,000 BC. And that the term Jomon actually should have an accent over the top of it, is after the corn-impressed pottery, like you see at the bottom here. And it's the earliest pottery in the world. And these people were hunter-gatherer communities. And really, pottery doesn't sit well with people that have to move around because it's heavy, it's awkward. So it's not usually made by hunter-gatherers. But these people had such an abundant food supply, they were semi-sedentary. They were living all year round, or near enough all year round in one place. If you have pottery, you can boil your food. You can extract the tannins, for example, from acorns, the toxins from some plant foods like the acorns. But boiling food is also very important because it makes very fibrous plant material palatable. So it's easy and consumed by very young people like babies and old people. The foods were available seasonally. In the autumn, we had the acorns, chestnuts, walnuts, berries, and then the surplus, which there was because they had so much abundance of it, was then stored, in terms of the nuts anyway, in pits in the ground, for which we have evidence. Then during the winter months, these people were hunting deer, hunting wild boar, wild pigs, with chipstone spear points and bows and arrows. And then in the spring, they were able to sort of harvest the vegetative parts of the food plants and then also draw on their nuts from their food stores. The thing about fish and shellfish, as many of you know, because we are on an island, very similar in a way, we're surrounded by sea, as Japan is, there's a year-round resource there in terms of protein. Something like 10,000 Jomon sites are known, and they're all around the coast because of this safe food source from the sea. The people, though, did actually build. They built houses like the ones you see here, the reconstructed houses here, pit houses, the pit under the ground, and then the structures built over the top. But the villages of these people were very small at the time, with just a few houses. At the late Jomon period, you're talking about sort of 50 communities, about 50 houses. Also in the later period, the pottery became much more diverse, including these figure pots, as you can see here. of deities for ceremonial purposes. Chamorro people were very skilled craftspeople. They worked in wood, they worked in stone as well. Now, it's not clear whether they ever became farmers. There's a big debate about this. Possibly they did tend various wild beans, like the ones you see in the slide here, the adzuki beans and the green grams at the bottom here, because they are grown wild, but they may have tended them. But they would have known of farming, it's just they didn't practice it because they had so much food available to them. Then about 300 to 400 BC, intensive rice cultivation in paddy fields and iron metallurgy. The first metallurgists came to Japan. And this is represented by a culture called the Yagyu culture. And it's very likely that this was introduced by a definite migration of people from the Asian mainland, probably from the Korean peninsula. Wind it up. Stuck. All right, okay. And the reason for this is that the various features of the culture of the Yagyu culture is very similar to material from the peninsula of Korea. Strong influence in pottery, in bronze casting, in weaving for the first time, and in timber buildings above the surface, as you saw in the last slide. Now, as well as rice, these people are also cropping millet, which they brought in as well, domestic millet and wheat. And this led to double cropping through the year. So you had the sort of rice paddies, the flooded rice paddies in the winter month, in the summer months rather, because that's where you got the rainfall. And then in the winter months, you have the millet and the wheat cultivation. Now, agriculture sped through Japan very quickly over a space of about 500 years in that time. And the population exploded, basically. So the saved food resource from agriculture, but also the gathered and fished as well. So we had this big population increase, and the slide's now gone. But this led to a period of conflict and warfare, and really Japan only came together as a state about 600, 700 AD, which is what it said in the last slide, which is now gone. So I apologise. Some of my slides are ahead of, and some I was very much behind. Thank you very much.